Breaking news from the NFL, the Commanders are about to have a new owner. Our Jonathan Jones reporting that current owner Dan Snyder has reached an agreement in principle to sell the team to a group led by 76ers and New Jersey Devils owner Josh Harris for around $6 billion. That move would close the book on the Snyder era in D.C. that was marred by multiple controversies and high-profile name changes. Snyder bought the team from the estate of Jack Kent Cooke back in '99 for $800 million. Now, Josh Harris right now is a minority owner for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That has been the path to owning a team, owning a majority of a team for some of the new owners in the NFL, including David Tepper of the Carolina Panthers of late. But he has a vast history owning teams in the world of sports and the major professional sports here in the United States. Let's bring in Jonathan Jones for more on this. JJ, what more can you tell us about the Commanders maybe finally finding a new owner?
Hopefully, finally finding a new owner. This has been going on since the fall when we first learned from the Commanders via press release that they were putting up the team, that they were exploring potential transactions for the team. Daniel and Tanya Snyder were. This, of course, amid any number of various investigations, both at the NFL level, at various government levels. There were congressional hearings involved with Dan Snyder's ownership tenure with the Washington Commanders and other team names they've been known as for the past 2 decades. And so we waited to see what the price would be, and it became very clear that this was going to be something between the $5 and $6 billion range. It would set an NFL record. Remember, the Denver Broncos went for $4.65 billion last year to the Walton Penner Group. That, at that point, was a record. This team, with its fantastic history, with its location in the Mid-Atlantic region, with its abundance of folks there who have a lot of money to spend and want to spend it on a winning football product, that it would go for a lot of money. And right now we have an agreement in principle in place with Josh Harris and his group that include Mitchell Rales, a D.C. area billionaire and philanthropist. It also includes Magic Johnson and a minority interest stake. Remember, Josh Harris and Magic Johnson had collaborated on a bid for the Denver Broncos last year. They were beaten out, of course, by the Walton Penner Group. Also in that was Matt Ishbia, who wound up buying the Phoenix Suns earlier this year. And so, it really kind of came down to Josh Harris and his group. There was Steve Apostolopoulos, a Canadian-Greek billionaire in real estate. There was also always the specter of Jeff Bezos and his incredible wealth, but reportedly never put in a bid. This appears to be the only bid. And if all goes smoothly, it should be accepted by the NFL. NFL owners should vote to approve Josh Harris and his group. We'll see if it happens in late May at their meeting. But for all intents and purposes, whether that approval happens in late May or some other time, Josh Harris, it appears right now, is going to become the new owner of the Washington Commanders.
Just a ridiculous amount of money, but we know how valuable these NFL teams are. The Commanders, not like many teams, though. They've got their problems, and he has some shoes that he's going to have to sweep out of the way and some issues there. What are some of the issues that he's going to be dealing with, he being Josh Harris and his ownership group, when he takes over?
Okay, well, boy, there's a number of those, Chris. I think the first one that everyone understands is that the Washington Commanders are going to need a new stadium. So if you're talking about in terms of big ticket items, FedEx Field's not going to cut it. And so the first order of major business is going to be Josh Harris, along with Mitchell Rales, who has been in that D.C. area, a philanthropist, knows every government person that he needs to know. They're going to work with the governments of Maryland, of Virginia, of D.C. in order to help secure some financing for either a public-private stadium or fully public sort of stadium. So all of that is to be determined. They're going to have to get a new facility. Look, the Commanders did not rate very well on the NFLPA survey that went around among all 32 teams and the players, certainly when it came to facilities. And so there's going to have to be upgrades made there. Essentially, Josh Harris is going to have to come in and say, hey, I know how things were the last 2 decades plus, nearly quarter century. It's not going to be that way now. And all of the investigations, everything from potential ticket sale fraud to harassment and various forms of harassment over Daniel Snyder's tenure, at least the allegations of such, and NDAs and private investigators. This has to be a new chapter for the Washington Commanders. There's not going to be any question about that. And it helps Josh Harris, of course, that he owns two other teams, that he's already been a part of the NFL family. We see there with the Pittsburgh Steelers with a small stake there that he'll eventually have to sell back to the Steelers. That's a very common thing. We saw with Jimmy Haslam and David Tepper. And so he is going to very, very likely be approved because the NFL is already familiar with him via his Denver Broncos bid, via, of course, his ownership, minority ownership with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so it's going to be about getting fans back to the team. I think simply getting a new owner is going to get new fans back to the team without Josh Harris having to lift a finger. But then the finger that he does lift is going to start with the small. It's going to upgrade facilities. It's going to make the players' lives a lot better on things that fans won't see, that media won't talk about. And then it's going to be about securing financing for a new stadium, a crown jewel in that mid-Atlantic area that not only will be able to host Washington Commanders games, but also if you're talking about a dome, you're talking about Final Fours, you're talking about a potential Super Bowl host, you're talking about concerts, et cetera, that we have seen across America these last couple of years. So from the big to the small, he has his work cut out for him, no doubt, but a low bar to clear if he wants people to like him as the owner of the Washington Commanders.
And JJ, what's the timeline for when this thing could be approved and when the power shifts? We're 2 weeks to the draft. We're 5 months or thereabouts to the start of the regular season.
I would imagine that Josh Harris and his group would be in place by the start of the regular season. There is an owners meeting scheduled for mid to late May. I believe it's May 22nd to 24th, somewhere around there, right before Memorial Day weekend in Minneapolis. And so there, if everything is in place, if the financing has been approved, then the owners can vote. And you need a 3/4 majority in order to pass them through. It's hard to imagine that majority would not be reached. And then at that point, he could be the official owner. Could it happen in what is essentially 6 weeks? I was texting around earlier today. It may be difficult, but it is possible. What does it mean if you're a Commanders fan? What does it mean for this team? Well, listen, if the new owner wants to come in there and say, hey, we're going to change some things with the football team, well, you got to listen to the guy who's in charge who just dropped $6 billion on this team. Of course, he didn't do it in cold, hard cash, and he won't be doing that. But he does have to have 30% up front, and so it's a lot of money, no question about it. And so what does it mean for Ron Rivera, the head coach, Martin Mayhew, the general manager? I would have to imagine, without any sort of assurances that have been issued, in large part because it's only an agreement in principle right now, that they're going to be safe, just fine, continue doing business as usual, but when? Whether this team was under great stewardship at the ownership position or whether they had been struggling like they had the last couple of years, I think any reasonable person could look at the Commanders and look at their coaching and scouting staff and say, all right, the seat's warm. Maybe not blazing hot, but warm. And so Ron Rivera and his group need to win. They need to win with Sam Howell. They need to win with Jacoby Brissett if he is the one who ultimately wins the quarterback competition when we get to training camp. The defense has to get back to what we believe it can be. And so all of those things are what the Commanders have in front of them. But Commanders fans, the D.C. area, this saga that has been going on and on, not just since the potential transaction was announced in the fall, but obviously for years and years of bad ownership under Daniel Snyder. It's all over, more or less. Now, there are still NFL investigations. There's still Mary Jo White, the independent investigator, looking into Daniel Snyder. I don't think he's going to sit for an interview, but we will learn the findings whenever the NFL makes that public.
All right, Jonathan Jones with us here as the Commanders. It looks as though they have or are going to have a new owner if everything is voted through, and it's a guy who has a bunch of pro sports experience in Josh Harris, $6 billion, Harris and his ownership group. JJ, appreciate the time. Mentioned Sam Howell, as of now, looks to be the starting quarterback going into next season. We'll see what they do in the draft. They have the 16th pick You can hear all the latest on the NFL right now on the Pick Six podcast. I'm sure they'll have a new episode popping up at some point today on the ownership change that is likely to happen in D.C.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.